Sharper than a serpent's tooth. Written by the Hanged Man 317 and read by Purple Star. Chapter 37. A Fight Between Friends. There was something wrong with Todoroki. She already knew it in the brief flashes of "Walls closing in. Can't breathe. That seized upon her in his quieter moments. Knew it in the twitch of her fingers whenever he used his quirk. "Half fire," Shinsou had said. But he never seemed to use it in combat. At first, Era had figured this might be a cautionary measure. Fire had the potential to be a lot more destructive than ice. And in a competition like this, it was probably better to capture your opponent than burn them alive. Against Tokoyami, though, it didn't take a lot of forethought to figure out that shadowy quirk of his wouldn't be very susceptible to physical attacks. Fire was the optimal strategy, the most efficient way forward. And yet, as Era watched the match from the stands, she felt her jaw tighten with frustration as Todoroki simply refused to even consider it. She watched as breaths misted before him in steady puffs. Watched the telltale signs of quirk exhaustion reveal themselves in the faintest tremble of his limbs. Todoroki, the powerhouse of Class 1A, was struggling to keep his footing against Tokoyami's Dark Shadow. And while admittedly, Dark Shadow was quite powerful in its own right, it also didn't take a fucking genius to guess that it would be weak to light. To fire. From what Era understood, Todoroki wasn't an idiot. Just a stubborn ass. She felt a wrinkle work its way into her brow as Todoroki hastily summoned another wall of ice to fend off Tokoyami's blows, forced on the defense by a swift assault that hadn't relented all match. What was he doing? Did he think that because this was just a simple game, he shouldn't give it his all? Era wouldn't have faulted him for that, if she was being honest. But all the evidence was piling up to paint a rather confusing picture. And the longer she stared at it, the angrier she became. At first, she'd just been unsettled, put off by the familiarity she saw in his motions, and his reactions to his own quirk. But now, ice shattered into countless glimmering fragments as Dark Shadow burst through, and Todoroki darted to the side with a lethargy he hadn't had before. A scowl forced itself upon her face, and she couldn't seem to dismiss it. Now, she thought, it was becoming more obvious than ever that Todoroki wasn't simply not taking the festival seriously. It was his training he was disregarding, the lessons in their entirety. For some reason, he refused to use a not insignificant portion of his quirk. And yet, he expected to go up against villains. Real villains. Like Argus and Nyx and Vulcan and him. It made her sick to her stomach. Left her nauseous with walls closing in and can't wash out. It won't wash out and...
You make the pain stop, little bird.
And... Holy shit, muttered Shinsou beneath his breath, startling her from her reverie. Tokoyami's strong as hell. Todoroki should be stronger, she replied, a little too sharply for her liking. If he noticed, Shinsou didn't comment. This seems never-ending, he said instead. They're just going to repeat this process until Todoroki tires himself out. Era hummed, turning her attention back to the match. Maybe. But she had a feeling that Todoroki must be smarter than that. Even if he was intentionally handicapping himself for reasons that were absolutely beyond her fucking grasp. There, a shift in the rhythm. As dark shadow threw its weight against the ice, Todoroki ducked around the swings with a burst of speed and sent frost snapping from his heels towards Tokoyami himself. Immediately, dark shadow withdrew, attempting to shield Tokoyami with its body as the boy stumbled backwards. "He's taken the advantage," said Era. "Tokoyami doesn't want to be on the defensive here. Unless he can pull something out of his ass, it's over." "But Tokoyami's been winning all game." The ice split at the impact of Dark Shadow's claws, but it continued to twist around the pair until it nipped at Tokoyami's feet, swiftly encasing his legs in a thick layer of ice. From there, it was quick work for Todoroki to immobilize him and send him flying from the ring, dodging Dark Shadow's furious swipes all the while. Era sighed, shoving the thoughts of, "He would have died. They would have all died," into a neat little box, and slamming a lid on it nice and tight. She turned to Shinsou, gesturing towards the stairs, down into the indoor portion of the stadium. "Shall we?" Shinsou gave a short bark of laughter. "Yeah, I guess we shall. Good luck, Era." "No such thing as luck. Let's show them what we're made of, okay?" "Okay." It wasn't fair. Not to her, and certainly not to Shinsou. But the crowd needed a show, and UA needed to prove that it knew what it was doing. So, of fucking course, the two general studies kids would be duking it out in the second round. From the waiting room, Era watched with mild amusement, as Ida practically carried Shiozaki from the ring within the first 10 seconds. A much better showing for him than the last match, at least. Unfortunately, that meant her own fight against Shinsou was happening all the sooner. Fuck. She couldn't go easy on him, which meant that he wouldn't win. They both knew this, she was sure. Era had beaten Shinsou in nearly every single one of their spars. Occasionally, he would get a lucky strike or catch her in a particularly distracted mood, but Era didn't get tired. She didn't miss opportunities, and she certainly didn't wince at a punch to the gut. Plus, there was the not insignificant matter of her having over 10 years of experience on the kid. She was going to make it to that podium. She was going to stand there on her own 2 feet and dare anyone to cage her again. But Shinsou was going to be a hero. That wasn't something she could really aspire to. No matter how much she tried to fool herself, who was she to stand in his way? Would she really be so selfish, so as to steal away his shot at the hero course for her own twisted sense of pride? Fuck. She couldn't think like this right now. None of that even mattered. He knew that she was the stronger fighter. And if he won this match so easily, he would suspect that she'd let him win. Era wasn't sure of many things, but she was certain that Shinsou would never fucking speak to her again if she did that. Present Mike was announcing them to the arena, and Era was pleasantly surprised to find that the roar of the crowd didn't bother her so much this time around. Perhaps she had simply become accustomed to it. Or perhaps a more cynical corner of her mind suggested. She had surrendered to the fact that there would be no escape from her inevitable fate. That Phoenix would find her, catch her, cage her, and there was nothing she could do to stop them.
And here we have our two shining stars of general studies, battling it out to see who's the best of the best. Suzuki Era versus Shinsou Hitoshi.
If Era didn't know any better, she would have thought Shinsou calm. Expression lazy, even as they took their places on the stage. But she could catch the telltale tremble in his hand, the faintest clench of his jaw, a stiffness in his shoulders that he couldn't seem to mask.
Ready?
Era couldn't forfeit this match. But that didn't mean she had to dominate it either.
Begin!
He wasn't even trying to goad her into talking. Apparently, he'd already decided that it wasn't worth the effort. Instead, he raced forward the instant Midnight's hand dropped, attempting to catch Era off guard with a swift jab at her face. It was an admirable decision, and spoke to his marked improvement over the last few weeks. Unfortunately, it was also telegraphed to hell and back, and Era easily ducked it to deliver a sharp elbow to his ribs. She saw a chance to end it then and there, to seize upon the weakness and press until she had him pinned against the floor. Era twisted away, circling him with a cautious guard as he quickly recovered and darted backwards himself. They both stood for a moment, eyeing each other across the concrete. This didn't have to be a brutal match, the kind reserved for alley fights and cage brawls. If UA wanted a show, then she'd give them a fucking show. Gritting her teeth into a feral smile, Era let her guard drop ever so slightly. "What's the matter? I don't seem to remember you being this scared during sparring." Shinsou snorted, taking one shuffling step forward as his eyes started across her form, searching for a weakness to take advantage of. "Aren't I the one who's supposed to do the talking?" She didn't respond, as they'd both suspected she wouldn't. With a small smile of his own, Shinsou darted forward, and their fight began in earnest. Punches rolling off crisp guards, stances shifting around the sweep of legs, the occasional glancing blow, dulled and distance in the tuneless dance they fell into. Era let the rhythm of it pull at her muscles in a way that was achingly familiar. Let them push and pull against each other in a display of martial synergy that could only be matched by long-time sparring partners. They circled around the stage in a ceaseless ebb and flow, the deafening roar of the crowd fading to background noise past the thump of her heart and the rush of blood in her ears. Sweat was beginning to bead at Shinsou's brow, breaths becoming more desperate and gasping, but still, there was a hint of a smile tugging at his lips as he sidestepped Era's vicious cross and wrapped his fingers around her wrist, pulling her towards a knee that she in turn twisted away from. At last, Era felt the dance was coming to a close. Shinsou was flagging, weariness dragging at his limbs, and Era herself was becoming restless in that simple game of push and pull. Shinsou threw another punch, and this time Era didn't dodge. It collided painfully with her gut as she grasped his arms with both hands, wrenching him towards her while she shifted to hook her foot around his leg. In one fluid movement, she slammed him against the concrete and pinned him in place. Midnight took a curious step forward. Shinsou, can you move? Shinsou struggled briefly against the hold, before collapsing with a sigh. No. Nodding, Midnight stepped back and raised her hand to the sky. Shinsou is restrained. Suzuki is the winner. Era helped Shinsou to his feet, offering a sympathetic frown when the motion pulled at his new bruises and he winced. Good match, she muttered, pulling away to give him whatever space he needed. Yeah. Good match. The two fell into step alongside each other as they walked back into the stadium. Shinsou obviously still had something he wanted to say, so Era let the silence fall between them, until at last, he broke it. You didn't have to do that. I don't know what you mean. Shinsou scowled. Don't. I know you let it go on longer than... He sighed, rubbing at the back of his neck. You made it into a real fight, so thanks, I guess. I may be wrong about this, but typically a fight requires at least 2 people. You know what I meant. Stop being so fucking obnoxious. That's probably my defining feature at this point. So, I'll pass. Fuck you. Shinsou sighed, expression turning to something more exhausted than anything else. Well, if anyone had to beat me, I'm glad it was you. Era paused to stifle the strange, fluttery feeling that comment left in her stomach. Thanks, Shinsou. I think you can probably call me Hitoshi at this point. I mean, you've been making me call you Era since we met, so it's only fair. He didn't even look at her as he spoke, which meant that Era's struggle to contain that warmth settling in her chest went, for the most part, unnoticed. She coughed, as if that might somehow dispel it. You don't have to. It's just a name. It's not that big of a deal. But it was. It was, because that meant he was trusting her with something. Something that was hers, and things weren't allowed to be hers, because she always took them and twisted them and...
You're hurting him right now, Bird. You know that, right?
It was a big deal, because Hitoshi was her friend, and she was just starting to realize the magnitude of that thoughtless error. Era would die for him. Not that that meant much of anything. More than that, though, Era would kill for him. She would suffer for him, and that meant that he was a weakness, easily exploited with something so simple as a feather-light press of a knife, and the right threat curling past a wicked grin. You good there? It's like you fucking short-circuited or something. Hitoshi nudged her with his shoulder, and the point of impact burst in hot flashes that skittered across her skin like lightning. Era felt something settle in her chest, battered and resigned, and found that it felt suspiciously like a promise etched against the inside of her skin. She laughed. Yeah, you've accidentally destroyed my robot brain. It can't handle change, you know. I think it's going to self-destruct. Rolling his eyes, he gave her another shove. You're the worst. If you explode, I hope it takes the both of us out. Fuck. She was so screwed. If she cared about Hitoshi... Fuck. That was really going to take getting used to. If she cared about Hitoshi, then that opened the fucking floodgates, didn't it? Who is next? It was so incredibly stupid. An egregious lapse in judgment that could only have fucking consequences. Fuck, she was such a... Hey, don't make me look bad, okay? You better win this thing. Era looked at him, and found that he was meeting her gaze this time. His expression was stern, serious, though his eyes were soft with exhaustion and something else she didn't dare name. If this was a mistake, then it was worth it. Hitoshi was her friend, had her care and trust and admiration, and her protection, if the need should arise. For better or for worse. Again, that dark corner of her mind rustled and crooned with sweet poison. It'll be for worse. It always is. A shuddering wariness settled deep in her bones, but she smiled as they both made their way back towards their seats. End of Chapter 37.